So you want to get better at Geometry Dash, and you want to start beating extreme demons. Maybe you watched a Zoink clip on TikTok and you decided you were going to jump to Sakubin Circles from Windy Landscape, only to find out this game has a crazy big skill gap. Or maybe you just picked up the game recently and you just want to improve. I don't know. And you're probably asking, why should you listen to my advice? And that's fair enough. About 8 months ago, I picked this game back up, and so far, I've gone up to Delta Interface, and pretty soon I'm going for Kuzareta, or I have like a pretty good amount of practice on that too, but I have not beaten that yet. I've spent hours experimenting with different methods for practicing, changing how I approach learning, and trying to get the most out of every session I play. So despite only playing like 3 to 4 days a week and like 1 to 2 max hour sessions, I feel like I've made decent progress. I'm also guessing though that you probably have watched other Geometry Dash improvement guides, but the problem is that they all repeat just the same thing. Practice more, stay consistent, don't give up. While all that is very true, it doesn't teach you anything you don't know already. Well, this is going to be another guide on how to improve, but I'll go very in-depth on many different factors that will actually help you improve. This guide will mostly be about the mental tips of the game, though mentality is part of it. It's less that and more how to actually process the game. And to keep everything easy to follow, I'm going to leave everything in sections just so you can skip through and find what you're looking for if you're trying to find a specific part. But also, I talk about learning a lot in this video and like how learning works. I'm not like a neuroscience major or anything. I just play Geometry Dash, and I've spent a lot of time learning how to actually learn the game. How improvement actually works in Geometry Dash. Now, the info in this section, I bet you've also already heard, but I just want to go over the basics first before I go over everything else. Geometry Dash is a game about learning and executing what you have learned. You play a level over and over and over and over until you eventually beat it. But contrary to what some may think, you're not just waiting to get the lucky attempt. You know, Geometry Dash isn't just about repetition, you have to be learning from the repetition. You can spend hours grinding a level, but if you aren't properly learning from your deaths, it's gonna be harder to beat the level. And I don't necessarily mean that you don't or you shouldn't take time to practice levels for a long time. Levels above your skill ceiling or skill range are going to be harder for you, and they're going to take longer to practice. You know, with every death, you're learning what worked, what didn't, what input was too late, too fast. You know, you figure out what movements with your hand or your wrist or your arm are quicker to execute certain patterns. And over time, you just become more efficient at that. The goal isn't to mindlessly rack up attempts, but to learn from them. Skill floor and skill ceiling. Skill ceiling and skill floor are the two best ways to measure your skill in the game. Your skill ceiling is the hardest level you are capable of beating if you really push yourself. It is your maximum performance. Your skill floor is the hardest difficulty you can beat comfortably. It doesn't require you to push yourself very hard to beat it. A higher skill ceiling means you're capable of executing harder gameplay, while a higher skill floor will let you execute that more consistently, which in turn lets you make fewer mistakes, and it lets you reach your potential more often. Let's say, for example, your hardest is an insane demon like Supersonic, and you decide to jump to an entry-level extreme like Cataclysm. After around 10,000 attempts, you finally beat it. Congrats, your new hardest has raised your skill ceiling. You are able to beat a harder level of that difficulty. Your skill floor, however, probably hasn't increased as much. And how so? Because in this example, you may have learned Cataclysm really well, but just from one level, you're not building the consistency needed to apply those skills across different types of gameplay. That's why some people will beat an extreme demon and struggle just as much as the next one. To raise your skill floor, you need experience not with just one level, but with different types of levels, different types of patterns, transitions, gameplay styles, click timings. And the more successful experience you get across a wider variety of gameplay, the more those mechanics just become normal for you. So back to our example, if you beat a bunch of insane or hard demons, which would typically be your skill floor at that point, you're going to be more consistent and you're going to be able to play the entry extremes, and you will see that you're executing patterns way cleaner and you're dying way less because of that. You're more consistent because you're more used to more gameplay, aka your skill floor has increased. Properly reading gameplay. Being able to properly read gameplay is a pretty big factor in improving, and it definitely comes naturally as you improve at the game, but it's also something you can take note of while playing and while learning new gameplay. As you improve, you'll notice that you'll stop reading gameplay one click at a time, and instead you'll start reading groups of inputs, which together would go into a pattern. And for example, take this section right here. There are several clicks that have to be done one after another. And a newer player might consciously think about every single click, and I call this hard focusing. When you hard focus, your attention becomes so locked in onto that one input that by the time you've already processed it, you're behind on the gameplay, and you'll either be hesitant to the next click or you'll end up just panicking and die. Instead of looking at one click at a time, look at several inputs at a time and know to put in that specific pattern for those inputs. And that's what I'd call soft focusing. This is one of the biggest factors for becoming more consistent. Players who can look at multiple clicks and know to put in those multiple inputs rather than looking at each individual click will be able to predict the gameplay better. The way you read gameplay also varies on the game mode and the gameplay type that you were playing. So I pretty much tie this directly into skill ceiling and skill floor. Sectioning off gameplay. Now, some of this information is already pretty well known, but I feel like nobody really goes in depth in it. They just give you the basic information about it. Definitely use start positions. This lets you practice any section of the level you want whenever. This is where most people stop the information though. When you're practicing a level, you have a lot of different things to practice. Fast transitions, it could be high CPS, awkward click patterns, visual memory. Every type of gameplay presents a different type of challenge, and not every section is practiced in the same way. If you have two sections practiced and you can complete them both by themselves pretty well, but you struggle transitioning from section 1 to section 2, then you are going to want to practice the transition in between them and then go back to trying to connect them. Another pretty big mistake is a big start position that covers like 30 seconds of gameplay. Like, if you die halfway through, it becomes so much harder to tell what you're trying to improve because your brain is just trying to process all that gameplay you're trying to learn at once. Break the level into small, manageable sections. You want to learn each section until it feels comfortable. You don't want to learn a section until you can get a run on it or until you can pass it, because there's a difference between being consistent at a section and just basically surviving it. You don't want to just be able to survive sections of a level because you're never going to be able to beat it from zero unless you get the lucky run. And don't divide your practice equally between each section. If you feel that you're really consistent on a section and there's another section that you're pretty bad at, put more attempts into that bad section. You want to get consistent at everything. This doesn't mean to not practice the sections you are already consistent at. Every once in a while, you want to get some attempts on it. You want to refresh yourself. For example, though, if you're practicing 80 to 100, you get that run, and now you put a start position at 70, do 70 to 80. Once you have that, try to link those together. If you struggle in the transition between 78% and 80%, then practice that transition. When I practice levels, this is well known, but when I practice levels, I like to keep my start positions, or I try to start at the end of the level and then move backwards, because this ensures that when you are playing from zero or an earlier part of the level, the ending won't be a surprise to you because you'll already have so much practice on it. This also helps a lot with nerves because a lot of players panic at the end, and if you're very consistent at the end, then it's less panic for you. Skill set and picking the correct levels. Okay, I'm eating spicy food. I look a little sweaty, dude. Fuck. One of the biggest mistakes people who want to improve make is playing levels with skill sets that they're already good at. Let's say you're a wave carried player. Wave is your best game mode and it's pretty far above all the other game modes. naturally you're probably going to enjoy 9 circles levels more than other types of levels because that will come more natural to you. The problem is your overall skill set will stay unbalanced, and when you try to beat harder levels that don't just include all wave, it's going to be hard for you. Eventually you'll reach a point where your weakest game modes are holding you back, and that's why you need to step outside your comfort zone for the levels you play if you do want to improve. If you struggle with transitions, find levels with quick or difficult transitions. If you're bad at timing, play timing based levels. Improvement will happen the fastest when you attack your weaknesses than your strengths. The same idea can be applied when picking your next hardest, but I think that you can go about playing a new hardest in 2 different ways. You can either try to go for the one that goes against your skill set in means of improving it, or you can go to one that fits your skill set perfectly as a means of presenting your skill that you have. If you go for a new hardest that falls right in your skill set though, you aren't necessarily going to be improving overall as a player. And remember, to beat harder levels, you have to become a better Geometry Dash player. Attempt efficiency. Not every attempt is as valuable as the next one. Let's say you're trying to beat a level and you have all of it practiced, and while you're playing from zero, you notice yourself getting less and less consistent. You're not making any progress anymore. You don't have to just keep forcing attempts from zero, even though you've already learned the whole level. Go back into your start position copy and just pre-practice where you're dying over and over. If you find that you're just dying randomly on stupid parts of the level that you shouldn't be dying on, just go back into your start position copy and practice around the whole level again, get consistent on all the parts, and play from zero again. If you play for a long time, you're probably going to get tired or fatigued. And that usually happens for me around like 2 hours of playing. That's why I keep all my sessions around that length or shorter. Once you get tired, you're going to process the game way less efficiently. You're going to start making more mistakes, and you'll notice yourself dying to parts that you just don't die normally. And you can try to go back into the start position copy after this to try to refresh yourself on, but if you're too tired to play, you're just not going to be able to play. Sometimes you just have to get off and play the next day. You know, get back on the game with a fresh mind, and you'll notice also that by the next day, your brain has also normalized a lot of the patterns that you were trying to learn. Awkward timings or patterns from the last day will just seem pretty normal the next day. Sometimes you really just have to take a break for a second and then hop on later. Alright, if you made it all the way here, thank you. But I could go into like hardware stuff about like getting a Hall effect keyboard or like a high refresh rate monitor. In the end, I do believe you can beat an extreme demon on whatever hardware you have, whether it's 60 hertz or you're on a phone or a controller. I don't think that necessarily matters. Having better hardware will give you a skill boost, but I don't think it necessarily will determine your skill. Yeah, I tried to explain everything the best I could. I know like not everything was explained the best, but yeah, I'm hoping at least one of these tips could at least help you improve just a little bit.